Very warm good morning, guys. How have you been? I hope all of you have been well and good. In the last class, we discussed a bit about theory, and I told you how you need not be scared about theory. And if you connect theory with your everyday life, and if you understand theory as something which helps you understand your life and the life around in a better manner, theory would be a very easy and enjoyable subject to learn. So today, to prove my argument, we are starting with structuralism, which is part of your syllabus. Now, when you hear about structuralism, of course, you have had to study structuralism as part of your BA. So most of the time, when you think of it, you think of concepts like Ferdinand de Saussure's ideas of signifier and signified, and the arbitrariness of language. We think of all those things, but do you know that structuralism is actually something that we practice on an everyday scale? Do you know that structuralism is actually a mechanism by which we function in our everyday lives? Have you ever thought about it that way? I'll give you certain examples and then you will understand. Now, when Ferdinand de Saussure introduced the idea of structuralism, the main argument of Ferdinand de Saussure was that words or meanings or they were not individual units. That is, language or the words in language or the expressions in language do not have a meaning of their own. They do not have an original meaning, but rather they acquire meaning when they are part of an socially accepted framework of language. That is, most of the time the examples given are that of the cat and the dog and all. A cat is a cat because it's not a dog. A dog is a dog because it's not a cat. That is, words acquire meaning because they are relative. There is a huge structure of language, socially accepted structure of language, or a socially accepted norm, or a commonsensical understanding of language, that certain things mean certain things point towards certain things. So there is an accepted notion, a framework based on social agreement that this means this and that means that. So the word cat does not have anything to do with the animal cat, but rather it's a social agreement we have reached at that we will call it a cat. So only a person who has a basic awareness of the social agreement or the larger framework of language can understand that the word cat points towards the animal cat. Right. So this is the crux of the argument of Saussure's studies. His introduction, a course in gender linguistics, which is a collection of notes made by his students from his classes. So the crux of the argument is that elements in language do not have an existence or a meaning of their own, but rather they acquire meaning when they are part of the larger structures of language or socially accepted norms and conventions of language. This is a social agreement that has been made, which actually makes language and communication possible. Now, this is the way our everyday life works also. We also have a socially accepted framework about many things. Now, when I go to a textile shop to buy some clothes, I already have a framework in my mind about what are trending clothes, what are outdated clothes, what are appropriate clothes, what are inappropriate clothes. So how do I get this idea? Because there is a general framework which is more popular and socially accepted about trending clothes, about proper and improper clothes. So there is a grammar of clothes that is pre-existent, which is at the back of my head. So it is in comparison with that framework that is in my head that I choose a particular dress, right? Also, imagine that your mother is going shopping and she's about to buy, in Kerala there is a regular site where there will be a fishmonger who comes on a motorcycle or an auto rickshaw and sells fish. So our parent, our father or mother, who goes to that person and buys fish, and they have a uh, hierarchy there, that this fish is good, this fish is bad. So how do they know that? Have they scientifically examined the nutrition value of the fish and selected that this fish is good and the other one is bad? No, right? So there is a commonsensical understanding, there is a common sense framework of which is the better fish, which is the that actually happens through again social agreement. You converse with people, and many people say that this is good, this is that. So there is a mental grammar that we have created, even in the case of fish, for that matter. Okay, and many other things. Now, when you listen to a song, how do you decide whether it's good or bad? Because we already have created a sense of goodness and badness in music, because there is a tradition of music behind us. We have listened to many songs and mentally developed a grammar of good and bad songs, so which helps us identify this individual unit or identify the quality of this individual unit, which is the present song that we are hearing. So this is the basic idea of structuralism. This is something that we do on an everyday scale. Now, when you meet another person, when you meet a person for the first time, you immediately go into a lot of judgments about that person. Oh, he or she talks a bit too much, or he or she doesn't seem to be that nice a person, or probably that person is coming from a very elite background. So such assumptions are made on the basis of, again, a certain kind of framework that exists in our mind. So what we do is we focus on that individual experience, but but along with that, we also compare that new individual unit that we are exposed to the larger structure that is pre-existent in our minds. This structure has been made of many experiences and, of course, social agreement. Okay, this is how we make sense of our everyday lives. So structuralism is not just a theoretical concept that you apply onto literary works, but rather this is something that we practice on an everyday scale. So I hope that structuralism is now easier to you. Now, coming to literary studies, how do we employ structuralism? What do we do? So what we do is we take an individual unit, that is a poem or a story or a novel, and we know that there has been a tradition of literary works before that, and there are like many structures of which this individual unit is actually a part of. Like if I take a sonnet, that sonnet is actually a part of the larger structure of the sonnet. Sonnet has a particular meter to be followed, particular number of lines to be followed. So the sonnet is part of the another structure called the sonnets. Now it is again part of a larger structure called poetry. Now there have been many poems in history, so we have developed a mental grammar about which is good poetry, which is bad poetry. So again we compare it with that framework. So again there is a larger framework of literary works. So larger structure of literary works. We again compare it with that. So we develop an understanding of that individual poem on the basis of the structures of which it is part of. So again, this is again very much related to a kind of social agreement. If many people agree that this is a good poem or this is a bad poem, I'm really sorry, it's raining here, so there is a possibility of slight noise. I know that my voice is already a bit low because of the limitation of my recording devices, but you can use your earphones so that you can hear better. Okay. So this is how we understand. Now imagine that I take up a novel. How do I understand that this is an exceptional novel? So what I do is I place it in comparison with the larger structure of which it is part of. Maybe the classical novels and the form and style, all of it forms one structure. I compare it or contrast it with that structure and decide its quality. And again, the larger structure of literary works. So I understand better that whether it's a good novel or a bad novel. And in any literary work or theatre or any artistic representation, we actually refer to many structures which are or many mental grammars which are already there in our mind, which has been developed out of social consensus or social agreement. Okay, this is how we function even in literature. In culture studies also, whenever we are to understand something deeper, we actually compare with the larger structures of which it is part of. Now, I tend to shift to Malayalam, but I'll keep on saying English. So another example that I give is that of notes. Now, if you look at a 10 rupee note, it is an individual unit, and does it have any meaning of its own? Actually, no. It's actually just a piece of paper. The 10 rupee note is actually just a piece of paper. But when that individual unit becomes part of the larger structure of banking, economy, the RBI and all, it acquires a lot of significance and meaning. And think of the game of football, for example. A lot of people running behind a ball. Does it have any significance or meaning on its own? No, right? But when we look at it as part of the larger structures of sports, the FIFA World Cup and such larger structures, it acquires a lot of meaning, and it becomes something that gives sense of purpose and joy to many people. So similarly, this is how structuralism works, and this is this is something that we employ in our everyday lives all the time. So I want you to look at all the theoretical concepts this way. So this has been a very brief introduction about structuralism. There are many significant aspects of it which we have to discuss, but now that you know that this is not a very complicated academic topic, but rather something that is part and parcel of our everyday lives, you will understand it better. So this is the kind of ice breaking that I wanted to do. The rest of it we'll do in the next class. Thank you.